allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Okay, to my knowledge, we have no requests for public comment tonight. So we will move on to motion to seal the executive session minutes.
So moved.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Okay, now we will move on to the consent agenda. So I need a motion.
Motion to approve the consent agenda.
Second. Marion, do I ask for discussion now that the agenda is in a different format?
Not consent.
Thank you. So all in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Dr. Bryce?
All right, so thank you very much. With that, I'd like to introduce new members of the BWRSD family. The first is Andre Audette. Andre comes to us. Please stand. Let's give him a hand. Dr. Audette began his career as a middle school social studies teacher in Pawtucket and was promoted to a K-12 instructional coach. He is nationally board certified and attained ESL endorsement to support the needs of English language learners. He has conducted accountability visits in Rhode Island, as well as worked with, I think it's the University of Texas at Austin, Center for Professional Teaching Standards and Educator Quality. In addition to that, he has served as a consultant to the Rhode Island Department of Education. He brings a wealth of knowledge and experience, and he will be serving as an assistant principal at Hugh Cole Elementary. So again, please welcome Dr. So next up we have Lindbergh. Where's Lynn? Is Lynn here? Hi, Lynn. So it's funny. So just in terms of just trying to do things right, I had to call Lynn's superintendent this morning and just let him know that we were poaching one of his folks. And he was very gracious and just raved about the work that Lynn has done. And so Dr. Burke comes to us from Coventry as the technology director. Prior to that, she served for a number of years as a teacher, as an assistant principal, and she has invaluable experience with the RTI process, served on school improvement teams, 504 coordinators. And prior to going into administration, Dr. Burke was a middle school and high school English teacher and a library media specialist. So Dr. Burke is the third member of our administrative team at KMS, and we are so excited to have her. Welcome, Dr. Burke. Next, we have Maureen Medeiros, a special educator at KMS. Give her a hand. You know, they say good things come to those who wait. Ms. Medeiros comes to us with an extensive education and knowledge in special education, IDEA, behavior intervention plans, and functional behavioral assessments. She was highly recommended by the interview team, and she has been at the forefront of district trainings in previous districts where she modeled appropriate instruction for other teachers, makes great relationships with parents and students, and supports students in the classrooms with special education needs. So welcome, Ms. Medeiros. And she's going to work with us over at KMS. I'm just looking to see if we have any other new members of the Bristol-Warren Regional School District staff in the audience. Anybody? Bueller? All right, seeing none. Once again, we'd like to thank all of our new members of the BWRSD team for the work that they're doing and going to do moving forward. So thank you very much.
Next, we're going to move on to superintendent's recommendations and issues.
Recommendation that the school committee approve the purchase and implementation of social studies textbooks, grades 4 and 5.
Second.
Discussion? Mr. Ramos?
I just was wondering if Ms. Santa might be able to provide some additional color, I guess, around the social studies textbook pilot program that preceded this recommendation and what it replaced and what we're doing going forward. Why we like this so much, I guess is what I'd like to.
The textbook that has been in our social studies classrooms in grades 4 and 5 is from 2000, so it's very outdated. It's very torn and ratty, and I don't know how else to describe it, but students and teachers are kind of hesitant to pick it up. So it's been the only consistent resource that they have. At the elementary level, it's a little bit different because they only have social studies a few days a week because of all of the subjects that they teach, and it's not uncommon at the elementary level. So although a textbook is important, there are other resources that they've been using. There are a lot of online resources. There are a lot of open educational resources that they've been using. But this social studies textbook provides us with a consistent resource, which is important, and also it aligns with what they're using at the middle school, and that was one of our goals. I don't know if you have any other questions, but that's basically the background.
Yeah, that's great. I have one additional question, which is just a, I don't know if it's clarification or just a point of information. We're planning on purchasing enough textbooks so that every student will have a textbook. There's not going to be sharing between the students or anything.
No, correct. Every 4th and 5th grader will have a brand new textbook.
Mr. Bradshaw?
Thank you, Madam Chair. At the last meeting when we discussed this, I think you took a lookup perhaps to, was it regarding cost?
I did, and it's in a memo that was in your packet. I'm not sure if you have it in front of you. The cost of each textbook is $64, and the total cost of the textbook is approximately $30,000, and that includes an online resource for teachers to be able to use.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.
Thank you.
Recommendation that the school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent and supported by the policy and curriculum subcommittee, approve the second reading behavior threat assessment team policy.
So moved.
Discussion?
I'm happy to talk a little bit about this. We brought it up at our last school committee meeting. It is based on Rhode Island general law, which put forth something that we needed to implement to be in place for the beginning of the school year to protect our students and our staff. Since the last reading, we have updated it to specifically reflect Bristol Warren Regional School District in name and title. We also added cross-references of other policies and also legal references.
Mrs. McBride?
Still doesn't have the letter.
It does. We actually updated it. It's EBCC.
All right.
We decided on that.
In front of you, you will see a copy that does have the code, the policy code.
Yeah, mine does.
Thank you.
Any other questions? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Recommendation that the school committee, upon the recommendation of the superintendent, approve the request of families to homeschool their children for the 2019-2020 school year.
So moved.
Second.
Discussion? All in favor?
How many students is that number?
One, two.
Do you know how many students that includes?
I can't hear you, I'm sorry.
Do you know how many students that includes?
Dr. Brace, do you know how many students?
8 students.
So no discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed?
Student code of conduct draft for discussion.
So moved. Oh, sorry. For discussion.
Let's discuss.
Discuss.
So today, we distributed to all the members of the school committee a draft document. We also have copies for our folks in the audience. And so let me tell you what happened. About, I want to say within a month, legal counsel, we actually conducted an administrators retreat for all of our school principals, as well as district administrators. And so the first part of the first day was spent receiving a legal update from our legal counsel. And then we spent the afternoon of that first day and the morning of the second day actually going over a review of the current student code of conduct and looked at comparable or actually other models from other districts around the country, and then compared the requirements that RIDE has. So the Rhode Island Department of Education actually publishes a list of offense categories or codes. And then what we spent time doing is actually building a matrix. And so there are two documents for your review and for initial discussion. And I'll walk everybody through the first one. So the first one is called a Matrix of Intervention and Disciplinary Responses. And it identifies 5 levels. And so the first thing I would want everybody to do is look at that first page, and we can talk about the 5 levels. All right, so the level 1 offenses are offenses for which they are designed to be implemented in classrooms by classroom teachers and teachers' assistants empowered to address student behavioral issues and return the focus to teaching and learning. All right, and so the majority of incidents that occur in schools are low-level offenses. They are the type of offenses for which teachers very deftly refocus our young people, get them their attention and engagement back on the lesson. And so it is critically important that we make sure that any code of conduct empowers our teachers and the folks that are working in classrooms to be able to handle disciplinary issues. What we also recognize is that there are times when the disciplinary incident, the level of incident has risen, and what we need is an offense or consequence, shall I say, that takes into account other supports that are present within the school. And so level 2 offenses are offenses for which the classroom teacher makes a referral to what we call a student support team or some other school-based entity that will then look at it and try to come up with an appropriate intervention. And when you see the matrix, and you'll see those interventions, and we'll talk through that. Level 3 offenses are the first category for which we talk about as a consequence an out-of-school suspension. And that's usually 1 to 3 days. Level 4 are consequences for which an out-of-school consequence, as the last consequence would be 4 to 10 days. And level 5 are offenses that would be 11 days through expulsion. Here's what's critical. If you turn to the second page and you look at level on page 2, where it talks about level 1 offenses. All right. So if you look under you look at all the bulleted items, these are items for which classroom teachers are already doing. We're not adding items that classroom teachers don't already do. Jonathan was in class today, was not focused, was not on task, and in some cases, the teacher may give, I love the term preferential seating, all right? So here's what we used to call it. What we used to call it was that we would move a student's seat closer to the classroom teacher so as to put the teacher and the student in close proximity control. That's what we used to call it. Now we call it preferential seating. All right? But what it does is it very quickly helps the student to be focused and engaged, and that's what we want. So the idea that we would have a code of conduct that would be focused on removing students is not what we want. We want young people in class, we want them engaged, we want them to learn. While at the same time, we recognize that there may be times when we need to redirect young people, and that's included. Look at where it says, establish buddy teacher / classroom system. There are times when a young person actually does need to be redirected. And sometimes that redirection means I'm going to send you next door, I'm going to send you right across the hall to Mrs. O'Neill's classroom. Because Mrs. O'Neill was my buddy teacher, or Mr. Battaglia was my buddy teacher. And so you're going to go over there with your assignment. They already have a spot in class, and you're going to sit there and you're going to do your work. And I'm going to see you right after class because I need to find out, tell me exactly why you weren't engaged. Tell me exactly what was taking place, all right? And so we want to spend more of our time in level 1 and level 2 than any levels. But we also want to send a very clear message to our young people that there are certain behaviors that are not acceptable, and when we see those behaviors, there are consequences that are appropriate that we're going to need to implement. And so if you see things like de-escalation strategies, teacher and student conference, positive reinforcement, things like that. If you turn to page 3, look at level 2, where we talk about teacher responses, as well as school-based intervention teams. Now, oftentimes people will say, well, are we adding another team? Do we have the resources to add an additional team? No, we actually aren't thinking about adding a new team into a school. What we're thinking about doing is utilizing the existing staff that we have in a way that will allow them to focus and provide support in those areas. And so under teacher responses, again, parent or guardian notification, restorative practices, detention, in-school suspension, mentoring, things like that. Under school-based intervention teams, we talk about parent or guardian conference. We talk about referral to appropriate after-school program. In some cases, short-term behavioral progress reports, weekly progress monitor, a student support team plan, right? And so this is very, very drafty, right? If we turn to page 4, a lot of times when people think about code of conduct, what people want to know is, you know, are we going to make sure that we keep our schools safe? So there's a balance, and here's the balance. The balance is that we always, our first priority must be that we need safe classrooms, we need safe schools. While doing that, we need to balance the keeping kids in school whenever possible. But unfortunately, there are times and there are certain events where the appropriate consequence is an out-of-school suspension, not forever, but to send a very serious message that the behavior has crossed the line, and then what we want to do is get that student back in school and acclimated in the school community as quickly as possible. And so under level 3, you see those offenses, and it could be a 1 to 3 day suspension, as well as a number of other activities. Under level 4, long-term suspension, 4 to 10 days. And then on page 5, level 5, the most serious of offenses would be an extended suspension or an expulsion. I would tell you that we almost never want to have to do an extended suspension or an expulsion. They should be done in the rarest occasion. They should require my absolute sign-off anytime we're going to take that step, because it's a very serious step. But in the same breath, we want to make sure that our young people understand the seriousness of this nature. And so I'll give you an example. We just talked about behavioral threat assessment as a policy. The committee just approved that. After the most recent tragedies in El Paso as well as in Dayton, Ohio, there were a number of individuals across the country making threats on social media. Law enforcement ramped up their response to those threats and took very aggressive action to show up at people's homes, to conduct searches, to place individuals under arrest, to get them to, and here's the delicate balance. When people make threats, in some cases, we recognize that there may be mental health issues, but we also recognize that law enforcement has a responsibility to try to keep us safe, and they're trying to balance the two. School systems are in the same boat. We have to keep kids safe. We have to balance the mental health issues that young people may present with. And I do think a revised code will help us to do that. The meat of the code is what we call the matrix. The matrix is that second page. So what staff did, and this was all of our principals, district administrators, what they did was they actually took the category of offenses from RIDE. So if you go to the Rhode Island Department of Education website and you type in discipline codes, you'll find two of them. You'll find one from 2015. It was updated in 2018. We used the 2018. All right, and so we have listed their codes, and it is by their particular numbers. We've given the definition. We broke it out into subcategories, and then we've identified where the consequence would begin. So let's just walk through the first one. So for alcohol, the definition, according to RIDE, for alcohol is that it is the possession, use, or sale of intoxicating alcoholic beverages, includes being under the influence of alcohol on school grounds or at school events. So I think all the adults in the room would admit that we never want young people under the influence of alcohol at any time. We certainly don't want them under the influence of alcohol on school grounds. And so we've subdivided it because there are different, we would start at different places for different categories. So for instance, possession would start at a level 2 offense. Part of that requirement would be, we caught you in possession, we do not believe that you have used or are under the influence, we are going to refer it to a substance abuse counselor. Now, here is the difficulty that school administrators have had probably for the last decade. We make referrals to substance abuse counseling for students, and parents do not take them. Somehow we have to convince parents that being in possession of alcoholic beverages, it warrants the parent getting involved and taking their children, taking their child to substance abuse counseling. And that's the difficulty, because we can't require it as a condition of them returning to school, but it is highly, highly, highly recommended. Under that, under the influence, we move up a step. So instead of under the influence being a category 2, under the influence is a category 3 or a category 4, but we're still making that referral to substance abuse counseling because we think it's necessary. And then sharing, selling, or distribution goes all the way from category 3 or level 3 to level 5. All right, so if we see an asterisk in that category, what it means is that is what we are talking about. We are talking about the serious nature and the consequence that would be potentially given out. And what we want is consistency across schools so that we don't have in one school, this is the consequence, in another school, we call your parents and we give it to your parents. So we want that level of consistency. I'm going to give 2 more examples and then open it up for the school committee for questions. So since I've been here, I think this is week 5. One of the things that has been consistently, that people have consistently shared is their concern about whether or not bullying is occurring in schools and whether or not we are addressing it. So if you turn to page 2, look at number 35, where we talk about threat and intimidation includes bullying. I'm just going to read the key parts of the definition. Right? So it talks about to unlawfully place another person in fear of bodily harm through verbal threats without displaying a weapon or subjecting the person to actual physical attack. This also includes bullying. Bullying means the use of a written, verbal, or electronic expression or a physical act or gesture or any combination thereof directed at a student that A, causes physical or emotional harm to the student or damage to the student's property. B, places the student in reasonable fear of harm to himself or herself or of damage to his or her property. C, creates an intimidating, threatening, hostile, or abusive educational environment for the student. And D, infringes on the rights of the student to participate in school activities. Or E, materially and substantively disrupts the education process or the orderly operation of a school, includes cyberbullying, i.e., or bullying through the use of technology or electronic device. Right? So here's what's critical. When these types of incidents occur, and everything that occurs in a school is not bullying. And so you're going to hear me say that all year. Every time two students have a disagreement, it does not mean that it is bullying. It may be inappropriate, but it does not mean that it is bullying. What we have to do is make sure that the adults are being responsive and addressing the behavior as quickly as possible so that we can prevent it from occurring again. But I would caution everyone that every disagreement between two young people in our buildings is not bullying, all right? But we do need to really, really make sure, and I'm going to speak with all of our staff tomorrow, we need to make sure that we're creating the type of environments and cultures and climates where students are going to be able to come to school to learn in an environment where they feel comfortable and it's free of harassment and intimidation. Last thing that I would draw your attention to, all right, the issue of vaping is also something that has really come up. And the one place where it's not specifically spelled out, which is problematic to us. But if you look under the possession, you go back to page 1, right? So we talk about being under the influence of things. It would be included there, but we need to do some work to highlight that. It might also be under tobacco, which is another thing. And so we just need this is where we'll work with legal counsel. We'll talk to our colleagues at RIDE. But for parents in the audience, for young people that may be watching at some point, the issue of vaping is a significant health risk. There are now increasing numbers of young people that are having significant health issues as it relates to the use of these vaping e-cigarette tools. And unfortunately, they are odorless, they are smokeless, colorless, and it is hard to really know that young people might be doing this in schools, in bathrooms, and things like that. And so we just need to make sure that we have an awareness campaign, a prevention campaign. We're referring them to the types of substance abuse support that would help them to no longer use these products. And then finally, there are times, and I see Dr. DiBiase in the back, there are times when the absolute right consequence for repeated use of these instruments on our school grounds is an exclusion from school for some period of time. And I fully support that, but not for the first one, but it doesn't mean that you get one for free. it means that we're going to try to get you some help. You need to not use this. You need to recognize the risk that you're facing. But at some point, that check is going to come due, and there's going to be a more significant consequence. And so with that, I open for conversation and discussion among the school committee.
I actually have a question, if you don't mind.
I'm sorry. I don't know if that is appropriate because I think it's the discussion of the school committee.
Okay, if I could just throw something out there, number 43, sexual assault and police contact environment is not listed. And I'm just wondering why that is, considering it is, it's that problem and it's.
Do me a favor, write it down for us. Don't forget this is a draft. We will continue to work on it, but write it down for us.
Thank you.
Does anyone have any comments from the school committee? Mr. Ramos?
Thank you very much for the immense amount of work that has gone into this already, and the, I think, appropriate focus on trying to find a measure of consistency in terms of the way that everybody understands what each type of offense is, and the also the measure of consistency with how consequences will be meted out, and sort of understanding that this is a draft and that it's still being worked on. I think my first two questions are, one, what is sort of the next, what is the anticipated next steps in moving this toward the final product that would be implemented, and sort of tied in with that is what's the timeline of when we intend to implement it, given that school's starting in a week and a day.
So a couple of things. I think first and foremost, we want feedback from a host of folks. We want feedback from our students. We want feedback from our teachers and our staff. And we want to continue to refine and clarify this. But at the same time, as you mentioned, we do have to open schools. And so I think the good thing is we know that in large part, anytime our administrators are faced with the question of what to do, they're probably going to be on the phone with myself, with Diane, Santa, and other district folks just to check in. And so, number one, I just think we're at a good time. The start of the school year tends to be we tend to have a respite, right? Everybody's on their best behavior. It's the start of the school year. I think what we're going to do is we're going to share our idea with staff to get their feedback. We're going to share it with students to get their feedback, and then have legal counsel just review and just make sure that we haven't done anything outside of the bounds of what RIDE wants for us. And then we'll bring it back for consideration and for action by the school committee. I would expect that would happen within the first quarter of the school year.
Thank you. And sort of switching gears a little bit, I guess. In addition to developing what I would describe as the framework for the way that the Code of Conduct, what the Code of Conduct is a framework for implementation by the adults in the building, right? As part of this process, has there yet been, because I imagine there will be, a discussion of the way in which we'll both communicate how it should be implemented by those adults and what it will look like for us to ensure that our intended implementation is the actual implementation that occurs?
Yeah, so it's funny that you mentioned that. I think what most districts miss in the implementation of codes of conduct, so they get the code right, they do professional development. What they don't do is consistently is monitoring of the implementation by looking at all of the suspensions, all of the outcomes that occur. And I think what we need to do is make sure that we are monitoring. And so what we would have is we would have monthly meetings to review every disciplinary incident that has occurred. I would expect, and part of this is a systems, right? So we need to have the system that would allow this to happen. But we need to be able to review every disciplinary incident that occurs to make sure that it was consistent with the expectations set forth in a document that the school committee has reviewed and approved, a document that has been shared with the community, that has been given feedback from the community and staff. And by the way, here's the one thing I would say. We should not expect that we're going to have a document that everyone loves. There's going to be something in here that people are like, oh, that seems too stringent. We want stringent in some areas. In other areas, we want a little bit more flexibility. And so I would give you an example. When it comes to weapons, we need to be very clear that weapons have no place on our campus for any reasons. And what we want to do is we want to send a very clear message that that is not something that we expect our young people to participate in. And my review indicates that we've seen very little of that, and we want to keep it that way. But at the same time, I think we, from the community, and from young people, what we've heard is that the way young people are interacting with each other seems to be problematic, and we need to spend some time building the positive culture and climate that helps young people interact positively with each other, helps staff to interact positively with young people as well, and not, sometimes young people say things and it causes us as adults to have a response. And so I need the adults also to be mindful of how we react.
Thank you. And I just have one more. In terms of getting the feedback that you're looking for from all the constituencies that you want to get it from, and I know that the school committee is one of those constituencies. I don't necessarily think that going line by line during this particular discussion right now is the most effective and efficient way to do that. But in general, whether it's from the school committee or from anybody else, what would be the most effective and efficient way for people to give you the feedback that you're looking for, and sort of what form would you like it in, what time frame would you think you would need to get it?
So we're going to do two things. So we're going to have a email address that people will be able to give us feedback, and we'll post a draft copy of this on our website, both the matrix as well as this intervention and disciplinary response. Allow people to take a look at that and then to give us an email that says, hey, have you thought of this? Or I have questions about that. And we'll just do our level best to respond to that.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Any other questions? Mr. Bento? Oh, sorry. I'll come right to you after. Sorry. Mr. Bento. Then Mr. Bradshaw.
Thank you, Mr. Bento. Madam Chair, you mentioned weapons and the discussion around that absolutely has no place. What are your thoughts? How do we get, what are you thinking for the parent involvement in this? And I'll throw out a hypothetical. Little Timmy forgets that he put his Swiss Army knife in his backpack, and they went on a Boy Scout camping trip over the weekend, and now little Timmy comes to school with a Swiss Army knife. Maybe little Timmy forgot. Did the parents look? Do the parents do a bag check? How do we get parental involvement in this so that little Timmy doesn't show up after a long weekend of camping with the Boy Scouts, and then now he has a knife in his bag, and we're going straight to level 3.
So I would say to Timmy and his parents that you went camping over the weekend. You get to school, you realize that you have your Swiss Army knife. You need to take your bag with the Swiss Army knife to the nearest adult and say, you know what, I was camping this weekend, I forgot, and I've got my Swiss Army knife. Can I give that to you? And that adult will be trained and instructed to turn that into the office. I would think that what we want is a reasonable approach, all right? So if that Swiss Army knife never came out of the bag, it was not used against anybody, there were no threats made, and the student turned it in on themselves that day, I would think that would just be a reminder to the parent, please make sure you're checking to make sure that your children aren't bringing stuff from camping. And don't forget, we have students that go camping, whether they be Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts. I've been in a state where kids on their lacrosse stick, so you know cutting the nets on lacrosse, there's a tool that kid had the tool cutting the lacrosse and ended up being suspended, right? And so part of this is about awareness. Part of this is about making sure that young people are turning these things into administrators. And we can go from there. I do think we're going to take, we want to be consistent. We want to have a reasonable person approach. We certainly don't want to unfairly provide a consequence when there was no intent, there has been no threat, there's been, but I can tell you, the blade on the Swiss Army knife tends to be relatively small. Now, could it do harm? Absolutely. But again, if it was turned in, there was no threat made, it was turned in the morning, I think we could find a way to give an appropriate consequence that may not result in an out-of-school suspension. But if there's a threat made, if the knife has a long blade, if it's a K-bar, yeah, we're sending that kid home for a number of days, right? And I think as we work through implementation, we'll come across these. I would expect that my administrators would call me and that I would be a thought partner as they're working through what the appropriate consequence is.
Mr. Bento?
I'd like to applaud you and your team as far as coming up with this tool. This is excellent. And I like the three that you picked, for example. In particular, the vaping, which seems to be a cutting-edge technology that we're seeing more and more of. And as I discussed with you earlier today, I had spoken to a parent in my district whose son was evacuated from one of our properties because he had either an allergic reaction to it or it might have been mixed with something. But the bottom line is we do have to put something in play. And I understand we're trying to locate where we could put it. Certainly tobacco might be one of them, but may I suggest looking at 16 for disorderly conduct. In particular, disrupts the orderly learning environment or possess a threat to the health, safety, and welfare of students, staff, and others. Maybe that's where we can look. Another thing is looking at, and I think you've already suggested, which I like, is to look at maybe other school districts inside and outside the state. So, thanks for your work on it. I look forward to seeing what we can do.
It's a great team.
Anyone else have any questions? Mr. Cabral?
How are we going to document each incident and to what level? And when are the parents going to be involved?
So I think that is a great question. So two things. Number one, every suspension, every incident we should have a referral when it is low level and the teacher believes that the student support team or whatever the team at a particular school is called. So there should be a referral. So I would hope that there's an electronic referral, and so I know that Rose and Kate Mills are working through that. If there is an in-school suspension or an out-of-school suspension, certainly it is coded into Aspen, our student information system, but the parents should be notified typically pretty early on in the process. And so what I've always done and trained folks to do is when you have a student, you're still trying to figure out what the issue is. But once you've figured out what the issue is and you've made a determination that there's a consequence, you need to pick up the phone and you need to call the parent and let the parent know, hey, I've got Jonathan in the office, here's what we're dealing with, I just want you to know, there's likely to be a consequence under the code of conduct. And so if you want to start making your way to school, or if, because this is what's going to happen, right? But at no time should young people receive, and I think that's the difficulty. We certainly would not place a student in in-school suspension or an out-of-school, or give them an out-of-school suspension without notifying the parent of the behavior. Here's the allegation, here's what we found, and here's the consequence that we're giving, which is consistent with the code of conduct. I think parents need to know, I think students need to know, and more importantly, they need to know as quickly as possible, although they're not going to know. With the advent of cell phones, with social media, I do believe that information gets out before administrators have the physical capacity to have, brought the student into the office, had the conversation, done the investigation, talked to witnesses, and then made the determination, right? And so, unfortunately, because of social media, things just move much faster than we would like them to, and so we have to slow down, make sure that we've got it right before we call the parent and say, this is what we're dealing with.
I always like to say that the parents should be involved as quickly as possible, because for a smaller infraction, when you have that contact with the parent, when the bigger infraction comes, you already have a friend to work with you.
Well, I think, and I'm going to mention it tomorrow, I don't think the first time parents should hear from school administrators or teachers is when your child has done something that is in violation of the code of conduct, right? The first time teachers and administrators should contact students' parents is at the start of the year to say, welcome, we look forward to having Jonathan in class. We've got great expectations for him. Can you tell me a little bit about how he learns and what engages him? It is building that type of positive relationship that I think is going to help us change the culture and climate. And so, we certainly hope, and my expectation is that we're reaching out to parents long before we have an incident in school.
Mrs. McBride?
Excuse me. I raised the question with Dr. Price about cell phones. And the reason I brought that up was because it's funny what you hear around town during the summer. And the ordering a pizza at the high school for lunch and coming to a side door is an interesting thing that students have found. But my concern is, and the other concern I have is something that Dr. Bryce just alluded to, and that's parental involvement. When we have lots of incidents where children don't like what teachers tell them to do, so they call their parents on the spot. And then the teachers put on notice that the parents there is telling the teacher that they can't do what they're supposed to be able to do, and I take issue with that. But when I look at number 12, where it talks about communication and electronic devices, I think that it's broad, extremely broad, and open for interpretation. And so I'd like to see, as you said to me, Dr. Bryce, cell phones are a way of life, and they are. And I'm not asking that we take them out of school, but it doesn't really do much of anything in terms of having a bite to it.
So, do you want me to respond?
No, I just want you to know that.
So I will say this, all right, as someone that I've got an 8th grader, I've got an 8th grader, a 19-year-old, a 21-year-old. Cell phones are like oxygen, and I don't want school, I don't want teachers, TAs, principals, assistant principals, I don't want anybody getting into situations over phones. I think phones are lifelines for young people. I think what we've got to figure out is how to work with young people that they know the appropriate time, and I think I mentioned this, when it is appropriate to use them and when it is not. So I'm going to do an experiment tomorrow. So we're going to start our session with all staff. So my bet is that at no time during the 1 hour or hour and a half that we have all staff together in the auditorium here, that we won't have adults that are looking at their cell phone. Anybody want to take me up on that? Right? And so I think we're at a saturation point that we now need to figure out how to help young people know when it is appropriate to look at their phones and when it's not. And so the reason why number 12 only goes to level 2 is because I think we need to send a message. We're going to figure out this cell phone thing, but we're not going to figure it out by sending young people home. Now, having said that, this idea that young people are ordering, what is it, DoorDash or Uber Eats, right? And so let me just say this, folks. Enterprising young people, probably for as long as high schools have been around, have found ways to have food delivered to them, right? They're just now using their cell phones, right? We'll work on that. But I still want us to be, as a community, committed to the productive use of cell phones and not getting into the type of escalation that I've seen by arguing over, oh, you got your cell phone in class. You know what? Guess what? Is your work done? Yes, your work is done. Was it done to a high level? Yes, it was done to a high level. All right, you know what? I have seen it. I'm not advocating for it. I'm just going to put the idea out there. I know of a professional football team where the coach has given players, these are adult professional players, time during practice where you get here's an opportunity, right? It's free time. It's time where you get to go to it, like you can use it for a bio break, you can use it to go to the bathroom, you can use it to grab a snack, and you can also use it to check your phone. There's got to be a way that we can put our heads together and come up with how we use this. Don't forget, we're a district that is supportive of one-to-one technology from grades 6 through 12. What do we, like, there's a way for us to handle this. I just don't think, and I don't want anybody to believe that the way to handle this is by putting kids out for their cell phones. It's just not, all right? We'll come up with something.
No, I wasn't advocating for any of that. I just...
You just want you want there to be some structure, is what I'm taking.
If you want it to be across the board and you want everybody to be treated the same, then you have to have it spelled out better, because what one person will interpret it as, somebody else might not. And I think that that's
Can do that.
been an issue.
Yep.
And I also think that I did hear what that woman said out in the audience, and I hope that she emails you, because there isn't a space here that specifically relates to sexual assault, and there should be.
So 43 sexual assault and battery. 43, last page, number 3. A sexual act committed on another person without their consent or ability to consent, causing another person to engage, right?
Okay.
So did that cover?
Choose concerns, police contact, notification.
Oh, I'm sorry. We absolutely will be, thank you. We absolutely will be contacting police in those instances. That's an easy one. Yeah, that's easy.
That's
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mr. Bradshaw, is there anyone else first? Okay, I'll go back and forth. Go ahead.
Thank you. So, again, I'm going to echo my colleagues and say thank you for the time that your team has put into this. This is a great tool. I like the fact that there are a number of levels that administration or teachers we can start at 1, we can go to 2, we can go to 3, depending. I did notice that there are a handful that only have 1, such as cheating on a test or skipping in-school suspension. Is there a thought there, and I know this is only draft, but if a student is caught cheating on a test, every test.
Give me the number.
41 cheating on a test. It's just the third, yeah.
So,
Or 40 because there's no levels within 40, right? Absence from in-school suspension. If it's consistent absence, it doesn't appear that there's any way to escalate that past a level 2 of just giving it more in-school suspension.
yeah, so there is. So let me tell you what I've seen. All right, so number 1, what you're trying to have is a level of consistency, right? But we also have some young people that will attempt to see what sort of latitude they have within the code. So for this individual that might decide to cut and skip the same class repeatedly, the expectation that I would have and that school administrators would have is that they would be in contact with the parent. We might give you 1, we might give you 2, probably by the 3rd one, then I'm no longer going to say that the issue is attendance. I'm going to say at that point that you now are in, I'm probably going to say that you're insubordinate or disrespectful, and I'm probably going to send you home for a couple of days, right? Now, here's the downside to that. The downside is when kids are cutting school or cutting class, the consequence to give them is not to send them home. The consequence to give them is to keep them in school, right? So we don't want young people at home watching Jerry Springer, right? And doing whatever, God knows what, right? What we want is we want young people in school whenever possible. And so for that kid, I would have to come up with something creative. If I'm the school administrator, I've got to come up with something creative. But it's not going to be, I'm sending that kiddo home, right? I think for the other one that you flagged, like the attendance was easy. The cheating or plagiarism, I got to tell you. So, I'm just of the mindset that getting that failing grade for cheating and for plagiarism without the ability to make it up is part of the life lesson that young people need to have. Is it more difficult today because now, there are websites that produce, thankfully a bunch of those websites have been shut down that provide papers and other things like that. And unfortunately, for some young people that are intent on cheating on plagiarism, if they took all the time they spent trying to cheat or to plagiarize text and actually wrote the paper, they'd probably end up with a better grade and save themselves some money. Having said that, the natural consequences. There's a natural consequence if you cheat or you plagiarize intentionally that you should fail that particular assignment. So I actually don't feel like we should then send you home for a day. Nope, you cheated. Oh, you're gonna take the 0, right? And what's our lowest grade? Can we give a 0 or is it like do we have to give a 50? Huh? What was that, Dad? We
Unfortunately, we do give zeros.
Oh, well, and the natural consequence for someone caught cheating, right now, let me just say this. I also think it's graduated. I think if we've got kids in elementary school, I think they get a different consequence. But I think if we've got a senior on a senior research paper that is cheating, right? Oh, I think we've got, can I just tell you what that does? Just think about it. Maybe they need that grade in order to pass English in order to graduate, right? And we find young people in this situation all the time. So what are we going to do? I can tell you what Dr. DiBiase and her team have probably done, right? Because why? Because we all have done it. What we do is we bring the kid in, we bring the parent in. Oh, you have messed up royally, and here is your last chance. Instead of having the month to write that paper, right? You now have 4 days to write a paper and hope and pray that we are going to grade it, read it, grade it, give you an assignment, and allow you to graduate, right? I mean, that's the type of situation that unfortunately some of this behavior puts young people in, right? But at the same time, I don't know if you want to keep young people from, right? So it's a balance, right? Was this the first time? Were they just overwhelmed and stressed and made a really bad decision? How do we help them learn from that? Because again, we're not in the punishment business. We're in the changing business behavior. And our focus should be to help young people learn from the decisions they make so that they make better decisions in the future. But I do think you're right. It's a really tough one. I just don't know if I would send the kid home.
Mr. Bento?
Okay, thank you. Dr. Price, while you were talking about, your orientation tomorrow and possibly some adults playing on their phone, I was actually on my phone while you were saying that. So I totally understand what you're saying. I like the idea of continuity. I can tell you I was in KMS today. I was walking around the different classrooms, just seeing how teachers have already set up their stations. In particular, there was one teacher that put up, if I see your cell phone, even if it's in your pocket, I take it away. So the question is if you institute something like that, will it be different in each of the school communities? Is it, even different amongst the teams? I think that's the real conversation you're going to have to really look at. And even there, does the does the teacher have the ability to make it more stricter, whereas the team may say, yeah, not so much. But I think that's part of the problem, because when I've talked to other parents about their students, they say, yeah, some teachers don't have much of a problem with it, and others do. So,
and I think that some teachers don't have much of a problem with it because they establish clear rituals and routines and requirements in their classroom, but they also build relationships with students. I do not want teachers getting into the power struggle over student cell phones. I have seen it before. It typically does not end well. And by the way, my iPhone costs $1,000. And so if you lose my child's iPhone, who's now responsible for replacing that? Is the school responsible for placing it? Is the individual teacher responsible for placing it? What happens if you take the iPhone, you put it in the desk drawer, and it just no longer works? Who's responsible for now fixing it? The screen gets cracked. Every time, you have to replace a screen, what's it cost? $150? So, what I am going to say to all staff, do not, unless you are an administrator, do not touch a student's cell phone. It's not worth it's not worth it. Now, having said that, are there some things that we can do consistently across schools, across classrooms, to make sure that we're not seeing them? Absolutely. Absolutely. And the one thing I would say is that all teachers in a building, such as KMS or Mount Hope, have to be consistent And whatever our policy is, or whatever our practice is, but it's not a policy, it's practice, whatever our practice is, we have to be consistent about it, right? Because if one teacher thinks that they are building relationships and camaraderie by allowing it to, allowing something that the rest of the school has said, we're not gonna practice, we're not gonna do, that's the chink in the armor that then causes, oh, well, you know what? I went to so-and-so's classroom and they allowed it to happen. That's what we don't want. We want consistency. So whatever and I'm speaking to the KMS faculty at some point later this week. I'm speaking to the Mount Hope faculty at some point later this week. What we want is consistency. But what we do not want teachers and other staff, other than administrators, taking cell phones. And I will make that very clear.
Any other questions? I have one thing I want to bring up. I think one of the trickiest things when I look at this is bullying. And I know that when we were working on the bullying policy, which came down from the state, essentially, and then we modified it for the district, but everything that had to remain from the state was there according to law. So one, I know that you mentioned when you went over alcohol, when you first started the presentation, that you said that was the definition according to RIDE, so I don't know if that's consistent throughout. I'm also curious because even with that definition from RIDE, I think for a lot of families it's still really confusing. Is bullying always repetitive? Is it bullying before it's repetitive? Does it not have to be repetitive? What happens with things such as cyberbullying when it happens not on school time? And you don't have to necessarily answer those questions tonight. I just think that when we're working on that section, those are really big issues that come up a lot to me.
Yeah, so I'm not going to answer everything, but I'm going to give a couple. So the definitions are the definitions provided by RIDE in their database for the daily submission of discipline data that we send to them. And so the definitions are RIDE's definitions. The question around whether or not bullying is a one-time single event or it requires multiple or repetitive events is not one. In some states I've seen it where it has to be repetitive. In other states I've seen it where it can be a single. I am not yet certain what RIDE's interpretation is, but I can tell you this is their definition. So if their definition indicates their belief, then what they are saying in some regards might be that any instance or incident that occurs could be classified as bullying given certain parameters. What I think is most important is that we need to work with young people about how they interact with each other. We need to make sure that our school staff, when they see it, they are addressing it as quickly as possible. And then we're doing the necessary investigation and follow-up. If we do that, I think we are a long way in helping to create the type of environment that we want to see in our classrooms and in our schools.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Thank you so much for that presentation and all the work that went into this. I know you worked with the principals and district admin as well, so we really appreciate it. I know this was very necessary as our current code of conduct is pretty, how should I put it?
Someone said sparse. Sparse.
Thank you. Thank you.
Opening of schools.
Yes, so I just wanted to share with the school committee and our audience that we are quickly approaching opening day of schools, and just some key information. Number one, all of our administrative positions are filled, so we are ready with the approval of the consent agenda today. We've got our administrators at KMS, we have our administrators at UCole, all of our other administrative teams are ready to go, and supports are in place. In terms of vacancies, I think the number of staff vacancies, I want to say is, for some reason, I keep thinking it's 7, right? So we've got 7 vacancies across the district. And by the way, let me just say, there's been a tremendous amount of work that has taken place over the summer. And so before we get to school, I'm going to thank them tomorrow, but I'd like to also recognize all of our building custodians that have been in buildings this summer. As I've walked into buildings, they absolutely have torn those buildings down and stripped the floors and wiped down lockers and cleaned out rooms, and have done just a great job of making sure that when our teachers walk back in beginning tomorrow, and when our children walk back in on next Tuesday, or a week from Tuesday, that they're going to find great looking buildings. And so to George, I think George left, but George, please make sure you thank your folks, and also to George and his leadership. Funny story, I was walking Hugh Cole on Friday, on Thursday, and I walked outside, and they are just things that are pet peeves. And so a pet peeve for me is that I think when we open schools should be in tip-top condition. And so I saw some weeds growing through some cracks, and I called George, and he came down, got our contractor, and took care of it. And so I really appreciate that attention to detail. I also know that we had crews out in front of and all around KMS on Thursday for the social that we had, the watermelon social. And so I really appreciate the work that George and his leadership, our custodians, contractors are doing to make sure that our schools are ready. As I've mentioned, administrative positions are filled. We were working through 7 vacancies. And then let's talk about the schedule for that opening day. So I am going to ride a bus to KMS. And so the stop, we are still working on identifying the stop. But I am going to start my day by riding the bus with some of our middle school students to the middle school. And so I got to tell you, I have not ridden a school bus in a while, so I'm getting acclimated to that again. And from there, after visiting with the students and staff at KMS, I will come over to the high school, and then later on visit Hugh Cole. Just because I want to see the students enter those schools. And then on the second day of the school year, I'll visit the other schools that I haven't gotten to on that first day. But I really look forward to a great year full of excitement, full of great opportunities for our young people to learn. And I think that the work that our teams have done over the summer, whether it be district teams, whether it be school-based teams, whether it be teachers and TAs, is really going to show on day one when our young people walk into classrooms. And we've got some pretty engaging work that we're going to have for them. And so we're really looking forward to a great start of the school year.
Mr. Cabral?
He's praised everybody but himself, okay? The man has done one heck of a job since he arrived. I can tell you that I spent 6 months trying to get that ugly thing off of Naomi Street that the parents were all upset with, right? I will tell you, I saw this man, 1 week later, it was gone. That is how efficient he is. We are very, very thankful to have you, sir. I appreciate all you do for us. Please keep continuing.
Thank you, but I certainly am not doing it alone. My right-hand person, Diane, is with me all the time, and as you see, I've got Raquel and Kim with me. I've got Leslie, and I see some George is here, Mary's here, right? So we've got a really good team that's very focused. We have a school readiness meeting at least once, if not twice per week. Everyone's really committed to making sure that our young people come back to schools and they have a great experience. I think the principals, the assistant principals that are here, And so I certainly, I thank you for the compliment, but I know that it's not because of me by myself, but it's because of the team that we have.
No, but any good organization is led by a good leader.
Thank you.
Anyone else have anything to say?
Yeah.
Yes, Mr. Saviano.
Yes, Dr. Price, before you get on that school bus, make sure you leave your Boy Scout knife at home.
I will.
Thank you.
Mr. Bradshaw.
So I hope I'm not catching anyone off guard, but being the chair of the Budget and Facilities Subcommittee, I have to ask, and maybe Mr. Simmons would be able to answer, are there any projects that we were planning to have complete before next week that are currently not 100%?
I think Mr. Simmons wants to answer that.
I'd be happy to answer that. We started what we call a maintenance project. It was basically a bunch of different projects. We called the high school, and they're about 95% complete. We're waiting on 3 windows and one set of panic hardware, and then we're 100% complete. So as far as the projects,
So by next week we'll be 100?
oh yes, definitely. We have a couple of little small punch list items, but like I told Dr. Bryce, nothing that impedes the opening of school. Nothing that should be an issue at all.
Fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. If there's no further discussion, we'll move on to new business and begin with the Access to Public Records Act. I don't know if Mary Ann or Dr. Bryce wants to
You want to
begin.
start? Yes, so it is important for communication transparency to our community that they have the opportunity for access to public records, and we certainly want to be supportive of that endeavor. We know that there have been requests, and we have filled those requests multiple times. We now know that there are requests there is a request that is being requested that had a large price tag. So let me tell you in a general sense what we are doing. Number one, when members of our community make a request for publicly accessible records, we're going to do everything in our power to comply with that. So that is my focus. It is the focus of my team. All right, so we're not in any way attempting to not provide those records. What we are going to do, however, is we are going to cost out the time and the amount of resource that it takes to fulfill that. And so one of the last requests that we received had a significant price tag, and it had a significant price tag because of the request. All right, and so I'm just going to give you a very generalized idea of what the request required. So the request required that the district configure our servers to conduct a search, a keyword search of about 5 or 6 different keywords. And that search was of all emails for the prior 11 years, back to 2008. And then all of those emails that were identified would need to be reviewed by an individual to determine whether or not the email was germane to the request and should be included. The cost to review thousands upon thousands of emails cost well over $10,000. I reviewed the request myself, and where possible, I was able to say, along with my team, you know what, let's do the math again. Let's make sure we have this right. Yeah, we've got it right. Here's the request, all right? So I think, number one, in a general sense, and Mary and our legal counsel is going to talk about, we fulfill APRA requests when we get them. And so we've fulfilled requests this year, we fulfilled requests last year, the year before, dating back 5, 6, 7 years that I've got data for, right? Mary Ann's got data that indicates the request that our legal counsel has also fulfilled. Why this is important and what we think we can do moving forward is, in a general sense, what we are proposing is that once per year, we would make a report, and we would provide a report to the school committee that would show the number of requests that were submitted, right? The number of requests that were fulfilled, the number of requests that were not able to be fulfilled because the price associated caused the requester to say, I'm not gonna ask you to fulfill that because we're not gonna pay. And we'll also include the ones, the cost associated with that, all right? So the hourly rate to fulfill these requests is $15 an hour. What I can tell you is that staff time is way more than $15 an hour, all right? All of the staff that you see here tonight, an hour of their time costs more than $15 an hour. And it also means that they're not able to do other things that would directly impact student achievement, teaching and learning. I know why people feel, right? We're a government organization. People want to feel like, you know what, we need information. So what I would ask the public to do is to make sure that when they are providing these requests, that they have fine-tuned the request so that the request is not going to be something that is so broad that it requires so much staff time that the amount of the request is exorbitant. The other thing, and this would be a recommendation to the school committee that the school committee will have to think about and discuss, is whether or not we want to do that suggestion, which would be a yearly report on the APRA request that we received. And with that, I'll turn it over to our legal counsel, Mary Ann Carroll.
Thank you. And yes, the district receives many APRA requests. Some of the requests are simple enough so that when we hear about them, the district on its own just sends out the documents. However, sometimes when the APRA requests are so involved, our office will then respond and get the requests. We provided the superintendent within the last week all of the APRAs that we have actually provided to outside organizations. That, coupled with the ones the district has done its own, I think we've had maybe 20, 25 APRAs that we have together provided. Now, we get APRAs all the time. We get them from the ACLU, we get them from newspapers, and sometimes what we find is the APRAs that we're getting, every single district is getting the same APRA. So, for example, last year, one of the organizations asked for all of the bullying reports in every district redacted. That wasn't just an issue for Bristol Warren, that was an issue that they sent out to the 39 districts around the state. But because it was a very involved APRA, because it was personal information that we had to redact, that would be an APRA that my office would handle. The last 2 APRAs that we've received in this district, my office has handled. One of them was just compiling legal fees, and that was done without cost to the person requesting it, and that was certainly done. We were able to get that out within the 10 required days, and that's 10 business days. However, the second APRA that we received was a very involved APRA, and what we were able to do within the 10 required days is provide the person requesting the APRA with a letter explaining how much it was going to cost to retrieve every individual issue that the person was asking for. Now, we broke it down, and it all had to do with the athletic field project, but we broke it down by what the person was asking for. Some of the requests can be given for a couple of hours worth of work, but again, some of them were so costly that it was many. One of the projects was over $800, one of them was over, you said over 10, was over 15,000 because of what was being asked for. We're always willing to work with somebody asking for information, but keep in mind, as Dr. Bryce said, if it's a very involved APRA and staff needs to be able to provide that information, we can only charge the person $15 an hour. The staff that's doing that work gets paid a lot more, so the district is already putting in a lot of their time unpaid, and we're asking for the donation of $15 an hour. We will continue to work with the district and anyone who asks for any public records and provide them the best we can. But the law does allow us for the retrieval to charge $15 an hour, and then if the person wants those pages copied, it's 15 cents a page. So again, we ask the public to work with us. We certainly don't want to hide information, but at the same time, we don't want to take money away from kids to provide these documents to the public. So Dr. Bryce and his staff and my office have worked very closely on these APRAs. We will continue to do so, and we certainly hope that the public understands that we just can't stop what we're doing to provide a very lengthy APRA request. I'll answer any questions that you have.
Mr. Ramos?
Thank you both for that explanation. I think one additional point of clarity or inquiry, when somebody makes an APRA request that consists of multiple component parts, and the district is going to respond to it in the nature of the last response that we provided, which provides the information about how long it will take and what the cost would be for it. Is it incumbent on the requester to respond to that with either an acceptance of the fees or rejection of the fees or modification of the request? Or does the district have any measure of discretion to say, provide a partial response?
The responsibility of the district within 10 working days is to provide either the documents or a breakdown of the retrieval of those documents. Once we provide the breakdown of what the cost of the retrieval of those documents is going to be, that letter goes out to the person requesting, and that letter has to go out within 10 working days, 10 business days. Once that letter goes out, the district is no longer responsible to do anything until that person comes back to us and says, I want item 1, I want item 5, I'll give up item 3, or let me totally amend my request. At this point, the very lengthy request that we've received no communication back other than a request to waive the fees. However, I strongly suggest that if the person wants any of these documents, it could easily be amended so we could provide some of it at a low cost.
Thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions? Nope. Okay, I just want to ask for a point of clarification, because this year, the school committee has received 2 APRA requests recently, and this is the first time that as a school committee member I've received an APRA request, so I forwarded it to legal counsel and Dr. Bryce. Is that I'm curious to know, and I want the public to know too, because this is a new thing for many of us sitting here. What is our role as school committee members in this process? And how can we...
Normally, an APRA request does not go to the school committee because there's nothing you can do to retrieve those documents. Normally, the APRA request needs to go to the superintendent's office. And then the superintendent would then determine, is it something simple that he and his staff can then just provide, or does he need to turn it over to legal counsel to give a more detailed explanation? So you as a committee should not be receiving these APRA requests. The APRA requests should go directly to the superintendent's office. Now, most districts have a procedure for asking for APRAs. we need to see what the procedure is in Bristol Warren, because once a year, the Attorney General does a workshop at Roger Williams University and actually puts out a booklet on APRA requests and access to public records and open meeting law. And they recommend that every district has a procedure for accepting the APRA requests. In addition, every school district is supposed to have a person who has gone through the training, who then can filter the APRA requests and anything under the Open Meeting Act. Now, I don't know if we haven't done that in Bristol Warren yet, and I doubt that we have. As a matter of fact, I think the staff that was trained may have left the district.
No, I think Kim actually.
We have a procedure and I'm certified.
Right, so you're the certified person, thank you. So everything really should be going to the superintendent. Kim should be looking at it and then sending it to legal counsel if necessary.
I got to tell you, I think as a process improvement, right, and we talk about having processes in place, there should be maybe some place on our website where we are just sharing what that process looks like, so all of our community knows about it and we are transparent. I do know that one of the members of the school committee, we had talked about possibly having a web page or something. I would rather us start small and get it right, and then if we see the need to build out, we maybe build out. But let's start with just putting almost like a button on the website or a link on the website that helps us get to that.
Yeah, thank you.
I'll just point out, I've been looking at this on our, just in terms of what sort of information is already available, if somebody was to look hard enough for it on our website right now. There is a public records request button that currently exists on the school committee page of the website. And then that takes you to the APRA request form, which also includes instructions. And we do have a policy KBA, that's public's right to know, and then that includes two forms, KBA E1 and KBA E2, related to making public records requests within our existing policy book. And maybe we need to look at those and see if the button gets moved to a more prominent place, or whether there need to be any amendments to the way that those policies or forms are worded to make sure that they're as clear as they could possibly be. But we definitely already have the tools in place, and with Kim, being the certified person who is trained to handle those record requests, we'll be able to, fulfill our intent and desire to be the transparent public body that we intend to be, by making sure that these types of requests go through the process the way that it's set up for them to go through, so that we're able to get everybody the information that they're entitled to and looking for in the efficient, effective way prescribed under the law.
Mr. Bradshaw?
To follow up, thank you, Madam Chair, to follow up what Mr. Ramos said, Dr. Bryce, it might be a relatively simple thing for our technology department to, rather than have a link to a form that has to be printed and filled out by hand, that they can fill out a request online, hit a submit button online, and then it automatically goes to your office and to Kim's office. Probably very simple changes that her team could make to the website.
Yeah, so we don't know how simple it is, but I like the idea of making it more prominent and easier for people to be able to fill out the form and submit it. And that is something that our technology team will look into.
Anyone else? Just one more comment from me. I think one of the reasons I think putting the process prominently on the website is important is because there are times when school committee members will get emails about things such as this, and when we have to then forward it on, It's nice, it would be nice for the public to have an explanation of that. This is happening because this is the process. And I did reach out to a gentleman who reached out to me about this, saying that these requests go through legal counsel and the superintendent. It's not the purview of the school committee, but if it's right there for everybody to see, that way it's clear, no one's shirking responsibility or a job or not trying to address something, but that this is just the way the process needs to work.
Madam Chairwoman, before you conclude, could we ask a question?
Would you mind if you are to go to the podium and just state your name? It's just difficult for me to hear.
I have a small place in the big property. So my name is Lindbergh Island. Can you hear me now? Several months ago, you asked all of us before you came to Bryce for funds from a
Mrs. Rumichitis, I'm going to interrupt you just for 1 second. It's me. Just to make sure this is on topic of the outdoor request.
Exactly on topic.
Thank you.
You had asked us for funds to attend a 3-day workshop to learn how to be better school committee members by learning all of the rules. That's what you all told us you were doing at the workshop. And at that time, we asked you, as we gave you the money, to report back to us within a few months of what you had learned. So as we sit at the table tonight, it's very obvious to us that most of you...
I actually think this is entirely off topic.
It's not off topic
but
at all.
I'd be happy...
Madam Chair, this is totally off topic. We're talking about APRA requests. I think that...
Okay,
I see what you're getting at is that you think we should have learned about how to deal with APRA requests, but that is not what this was about, and you're off topic, and I'm sorry. I can't have anyone speaking about something that's not on the agenda. And if you'd like to talk about that PD that we went to, the professional development, please email me.
No, we'd
and
like
we
you
can
to
discuss
talk
that,
about
but it's
to
not
us
on
about
tonight's
it.
agenda, so I'm
Good.
sorry.
We would like you to talk to us about it, though. Thank you.
Thank you. So are there any other questions about APRA?
I was just going to say, Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to adjourn.
I second that motion.
All in favor?
Excuse me,
All
I
opposed?
have a question. Just to go back to the agenda,
I'm sorry.
can you just say who was hired? Does he say who was hired? For the positions, for the teachers and...
We can't go back to that agenda item, but if you come up after the meeting, we can give you a full list of everyone who's hired. Thank you.
Adjourn.
All in favor?
Aye.
All opposed? Thank you.